Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome, and thank you very much to be here. So there are a few people here in the room and a few also connected. Thank you very much for everyone for being here. I mean, in the yellow light, yeah. You are here for a session until 8 p.m. about social impact of cultural projects. It's an event which have been co-built and co-organized between UAL and LaboFriche in this format of conferences named the LaboFriche, the laboratory which have been launched a few sessions ago in LaboFriche, and which is dedicated to explore problematics, issues or preoccupation of the cultural sector with other specialists, researchers, but also inhabitants, writers, practitioners of different sectors. Thank you very much, and I will pass the microphone to my colleague from London.
I'm Mick Finch. I'm also working with Eva. I just want to thank Eva and the LaboFriche team. Just to say, that we've been working along with Hatleskog, who's one of the main drivers of this project. But also, we've been working in the context of a thing called T-Lab 1, which is not going to mean anything to you. There's no reason why it should. Which is, it's looking into arts and the relationship of arts and culture to meanwhile spaces. And LaboFriche has been a massive inspiration for that, and it's really been extraordinary to work with that. So it's just to say thank you, and I'm going to pass. Before I pass, juste pour dire en français, excusez-nous et merci pour votre patience pour écouter en anglais. C'est trop gentil. Merci.
I'm really excited about this event. It's idea for it developed through many conversations between London and Marseille. What we've been thinking about is the role of arts and culture in temporary urbanism. And one of the contradictions in the UK, at least, is that when we do temporary art activities in the city, they can sometimes lead to unexpected consequences like gentrification and increases in urban precarity. So what we're really interested in learning a bit more about is what are the long-term values that can be generated through art and design practices. And I guess one thing that's really interesting with all of this is it's not new. Practitioners have been generating value, social value and cultural value through their activities for many, many years. But it's often something that we can't manage to describe particularly well. So today is going to be an attempt for us to share our experiences of the actions that can generate social value in the built environment, and hopefully make some reflections across the two contexts where there's really rich territory to be explored. The event will be split into two sessions. We've got a value session, which is thinking about what is value, and we've got these speakers here. We're discussing things then. And the second half of the event will be looking at power. What can these values do? And then we have another set of speakers for that. But first, we're very fortunate to have Patricia Kaczynska, who's an expert from the University of Arts London in valuing culture in decision-making in the UK. And we're very happy to have her here to just share some of her thoughts and give us an overview to the event today. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. If we could put my presentation on the screen, that'd be great. Brilliant. I'm very happy to be joining you today, even though I'm joining remotely. I'm looking forward to hearing what the all the other contributors have to say. My focus today, as you can see, is on the UK and US perspective on cultural value. This is because this is what I know. I would not presume to be able to capture knowledgeably what's happening in France. And yet I am hoping that what I will say will inform what's happening across the channel, either through contrast or similarities. So I do hope that what I have to convey today will resonate with you. So yeah, if we could move to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So, okay, so I want to provoke today and ask, can there be too much social value in cultural value? Well, the answer is that from the point of view of cultural policy, this indeed can be the case. This is because of how cultural value and social value are understood in policy terms. Policy understanding does not reflect and in fact distorts what we mean by both social and cultural value. So let me first explain what our key terms mean. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is social value? Social value represents the value that people experience as a result of changes in their life. I guess no surprises here. A different way to put it, using the quality of life foundation definition that Ellie kindly shared with me, is that social value is the level to which individuals may feel their lives to be happy, active, sociable, interesting, and meaningful. Now, what is cultural value? Cultural value is non-monetary, irreducibly collective, and fundamental expression of the value of culture. What do I mean by this? Here you might think of elements such as the aesthetic and spiritual dimensions of experiences that people have. Perhaps more importantly, the symbolic dimension, the fact that art, design, and culture convey meaning that help us to make sense of other things. This is collectively and holistically cultural value. Now, the problem with policy translation is that firstly, rather than representing the subjective nature of social value, that is that it's in people's experiences fundamentally, policymakers insist on seeing social value in terms of objective outcomes and general indicators of social impact. Sure, policymakers have their reasons, and yet it's important to stress that those registers distort what social value is. And secondly, for cultural value, policymakers insist that cultural value can be expressed in monetary terms, and crucially, that cultural value is reducible to social value. And this is where problems start. This takes me to my next slide, which is on measuring badly and what does not count. Could we have the next slide, please? Right. If you look at the image on this slide, it's a photograph of a clay vase by a famous ceramicist in the UK, Grayson Perry, who used to be affiliated with our university. But the title of the vase is "This Pot Will Reduce Crime by 29%. Well, will it? This illustrates the issue that we have been having in the UK for the last 30 years, nearly 40 years. So in a nutshell, there was a shift in the 1980s from what can be called like a Victorian or Keynesian approach where the state supported culture largely on an unquestioned assumption that it was a good thing. The shift was to the new public management approach that was effectively an attempt to modernize public sector using techniques from the private sector, such as setting targets, monitoring outputs, and auditing performance. With this, cultural services became yet another area of state provision. And it meant that cultural sector had to demonstrate its impact to be accountable for cost-benefit analysis. This need to demonstrate impact led to the cultural sector's objectives being expressed in terms of other agendas. Basically, governments required that cultural funding has to deliver and be able to demonstrate how it delivers on other policy objectives. So cultural value became associated, if not assimilated, to other specific economic as well as social outcomes. So, for instance, tourism, employment, in due course, we started to think about the cultural industries. And yes, for instance, social cohesion, very, very popular with new Labour government. This approach has been called defensive instrumentalism, basically resorting to instrumental arguments from elsewhere to defend the value of the arts and culture. And with integration to other government agendas, economics became the lingua franca. So what does it mean? When people talk about economics in the context of cultural value and cultural policy, they mean two things. Either they mean measuring economic impact. So you can think like the Guggenheim Bilbao effect, right? All suddenly you build something cultural and you have increased footfall, tourism, local spending, and so forth. But also, and that's the second thing, by introducing economic approaches, you may mean measuring the individual utility. That is, that people value cultural experiences. Like, for instance, people pay to go to theater, right? But also, more interestingly, people value things that they would never experience or use. Like, for instance, when there was a fire in Notre Dame, all over the world, people expressed that they, thought that was an object of highly valuable objects, and were prepared to pay money to have it restored and rescued, even though A, they have never been, and B, they have never intended to visit, right? Something interesting is happening here. So it's cultural economists are weirdly interested more in measuring this non-use, non-market value, whereas it's the cultural sector people who are more interested in the former, that is the measuring the economic impact, like, increased spending and footfall. Well, here's another provocation for you. Why is that? Anyway, both of these approaches have their problems. Next slide, please. I don't want to go into much details regarding the economic approaches, but when it comes to the approach preferred by cultural economists, how they measure non-market, non-use value, it's basically asking people how much they are prepared to pay or be compensated for some kind of a experience, right? And the problem is that people come up with crazy numbers. I mean, it kind of, what would you say if I asked you, like, how much would you pay to prevent St. Paul's from being burned down? It's not really obvious how to do that. So in addition, these kind of contingent valuation approaches, they are called, have the problem of pretending that cultural value, that is irreducibly collective, can be disaggregated into individual utility and then added up. That's also that's a huge, like, conceptual issue. Happy to go back to it in the question time. The economic impact approaches are just like bad economics. Like, very few people really believe the numbers. Sure, they can be done better and less well. Still, like, they are problematic methodology. But moving to the second point, there's something more fundamental that gets in the way of using this approach, which is that when you focus on the economic aspects, such as, like, regional regeneration, increased tourism, and so forth, you suddenly find out that this is not what matters to people at all. I mean, this is like not why they want to have LaFriche in the neighborhood? Maybe partially, yes, but not solely. There's something missing in there, right? And also there's a question whether if you look at the economic approaches, do they really dictate how decision-making is conducted, right? Is this how policymakers arrive at their funding decisions, let's say? And well, here's another provocation. This Robert Peston, who used to be a BBC economic editor, kind of looking at this situation, said, if we could demonstrate conclusively that the economic impact of the arts was zero, would we stop children from learning to draw? Well, no. And if we could demonstrate that the economic impact of having, I don't know, Aborigine art or opera house or you name it was zero, would we like insist on getting rid of those? Not quite, right? So what you see here is that decision making is not based on economic calculation, and probably is not always evidence based either, but that's for later. Anyway, let me give a very, very quick example. Next slide, please. I know that my colleagues will be giving lots of very detailed and interesting examples. So I just want very, very generally look at what has been called creative placemaking in the US. American Planning Association describes creative placemaking as a process where community members, artists, arts and cultural organizations, community developers, and other stakeholders use arts and cultural strategies to implement community-led change. This approach aims to increase vibrancy, improve economic conditions, and build capacity among residents to take ownership of their communities. It kind of, resonates. I mean, you kind of would think, well, their heart is in the right place, right? This is not a new approach. As a way of kind of acting locally across different dimensions using the arts, those sort of frameworks were already being introduced in San Francisco in the 1950s. However, creative placemaking as an attempt to ring-fence a policy domain to talk about cultural value and social value is quite a new thing in the US. It is around 2010 that the main US funder in the arts, National Endowment for the Arts, started to invest over 40 million, and Art Place America, a charity that works with different organizations, put over 150 million towards creative placemaking, right? So what we see is like a really economies of scale, like a big accumulation. And yet, next slide, please. Either because, not despite, but because of the scale of investment, when a few years later, people do start to ask, so, what happened through those many interventions in our cities? It turned out that there was a massive issue to demonstrate that the creative placemaking programs have achieved their objectives or met their goals. And this despite that not so much programming, but evaluation was highly subsidized. There was a lot of money poured into validating indicators and developing those indicators. So why? This sparked the debate. So what happened? And essentially three things happened. The mistake was made in using policy registers, wanting to demonstrate that creative placemaking make a difference in terms of what policymakers cared about, rather than what actually changed through cultural engagement. That's taking us back to the defensive instrumentalism, this problem. Then there was the issue of using one-size-fits-all indicators and suggesting that everyone has to use a comprehensive list without being able to choose depending on regional or local variation. And then thirdly, there was too much focusing on input-output evaluation, rather than understanding the systemic interaction within places. the need to understand local ecologies was in fact the key learning point from that huge initiative. But also what transpired is that, surprise, surprise, placemaking, if it suggests that there are no places before they are made, is not a good name. So there has been a shift towards place shaping as a result. But this takes me to my last point to discuss the lessons that have been learned that I want to share with you today and leave you with how to do things better. So last slide, please. Right, measuring better and what matters. Well, measuring less badly and paying attention to what matters. This, I want to suggest, presupposes essentially three things. Once again, learning from the mistakes in creative placemaking. So regarding the first and the need for subjective validated registers, and this going back to the definition of social value, that you are effectively looking at how change is experienced by people. You need to involve stakeholders and understand what matters to them and assess change in terms that are meaningful to them, and yet in terms of validated indicators, that is checking that the indicators mean what they purport to mean to everyone. There's a lot of confusion that people express different things by, big terms like livable and so forth. Secondly, you need portfolio approaches. So being sensitive to local variations and context, people should be given choices of what the proverbial boxes they want to tick. Basically, not all of the indicators have to be applied to all the places at all times. Different places will have variations. And most importantly, systemic approaches. What does systemic mean? It means paying attention to relationships and how the units are related within the system. And this can apply for places on a smaller scale, or it can in fact apply to big units like national accounting. Let me very briefly explain how that works. So in traditional approaches, those that distort both cultural and social value, we're used to growing things in individual silos and growing the pie. Like let's assume we have a pie. So we want to grow the pie, or even worse, grow a cherry on top of the pie without paying attention to anything else. And we now know that this is unsustainable. Why? Because we're only paying attention to growing individual units without tracking damage that might be caused elsewhere, right? Instead, we should be looking at how the slices of the cakes are cut up, and indeed how they are configured within the larger tray. Lots of metaphors here. Anyway, in those more general terms, the sort of how the cake is made up approaches are now in fact being proposed in mostly coming from environmental economics and ecological economics and I guess ecological sciences more broadly. But if you look at approaches such as inclusive or comprehensive wealth, these offer a way of rethinking what we are doing. Basically, the basic idea is that systems can improve without growing, that a society can increase its inclusive wealth and social well-being without growing the capital goods, but by making a better use of what we have, by reconfiguring the relationships within the system. This, I'm arguing, applies both to place-based approaches, but also to, I guess, national accounts and systems of this scale. And to conclude, this is where the intersection of cultural and social value should be understood. Cultural value helps us with reimagining how to reconfigure the system and provides the basis for coordinating our action. This, in turn, solidifies the basis for social well-being and the individual perceptions of social value. And I will stop here to see if we have any time for questions.
Hi, do we have any questions from the crowd, or do we not have time? Do we have any questions from the room to ask Patricia?
I'm very happy to let you dwell on this, and if there's anything, you have my email address in the presentation. I'm very happy to be contacted that way.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Patricia. I really think that was a great start to the event this evening. Now we're going to move on to the value session. We have 4 speakers up here with me. There are going to be 3 presentations, and it's a mix of perspectives from Marseille and London. So first up, we're going to... Oh, and one thing before we start is we've got some people who are joining us online. If you have any questions that you want to ask the speakers, you can pop them in the chat and they'll get shouted out after the presentations. So at the table with us this evening, we've got Mathilde Goûteux, Carole Giordano, and Mathilde is a PhD doing her PhD candidate doing her research here at LaboFriche. And Carole is a digital and hybrid arts producer, also based here at Friche. Is that correct? Yeah. And then following them, we've got Malik Benghali, who's an expert here in France in social utility projects. And then finally, we're going to be speaking with, or Sven Muendner is going to be speaking to us from a sort of UK perspective. So I'd like to pass the floor to Mathilde and Carole, please.
Hello, everybody. So I'm actually a PhD student here at LaboFriche, but I will be talking about an experience that I had before. We're with Carole Giordano. We're going to give you a testimony about a study that we conducted in 2021 for ACNUM, which is the national network in France for hybrid and digital art actors. So the first thing to introduce this presentation was to talk to you about our methodology to conduct this study. And first, the question we asked ourselves, what do we want to grasp, the effects we want to grasp. So as Patricia already a little bit introduced, the effects of a project or an actor can be direct or indirect, and merchants or non-merchants. And most of the time, when you do a value impact or a social value or economical value on a territory measurement can be a problematic term, but we're not going to go inside those debates. But most of the time we measure more merchant effects. The direct ones, for instance, for a cultural event, will be how many jobs you created, how many tickets you sold, those kind of stuff. And the indirect ones could be, all the local spending in the hotels, the restaurants nearby, all those kind of things. But what we wanted to observe were more what we call the externalities, which is actually something that comes from economics, which are the effects that are non-merchant and are indirect. So they can be perceived as positive or negative on all the stakeholders that will be affected by your project. And those are much more complicated to grasp. So to grasp those externalities, there's a urgent need for participative methodologies. There are many reasons for this. The first one, actually, Patricia said, we cannot have one-size-fits-all indicators because all territories have their needs, and so the idea is for participative methodology is to ask the actors what's relevant for them, and so that's one of the more important things. It gives you richer information for the local needs and local effects where the actors actually develop their activities. There is also another interesting dimension of developing participative methodology is it can empower the actors and give them tools to develop their projects and to defend them to funders. And of course, as a researcher, there's also the idea of promoting another way of producing knowledge, which is the promoting experiential knowledge and not only the expert voice. So that's for the why. And now I'm going to talk to you about the example of the research that I conducted with the researcher Raphaël Besson in 2021 for ACNUM, the network I told you about for hybrid and digital art actors. And the idea was to actually grasp the externalities of those actors. And to help them, because it's kind of a marginal art sector, to help them understand their externalities and be able to defend them also for cultural policies. So there were 3 steps in the methodology we developed. First, we made some workshops with the actors, which are not only, there were 3 fields in France of experiment with 3 located actors, and we conducted the workshops with stakeholders, so with the funders, the partners, and we wanted to go to the users too, but they were not in the workshops. And with and during the workshops, we try to understand what was the effect of those actors that could be positive or negative. That was something that we were interested in to understand too. After all these workshops, we created auto-evaluative questionnaires that were more widely sent to all the stakeholders of those different hybrid and digital art projects, so they could evaluate. There were qualitative and quantitative questions, and they would evaluate the intensity of the effect that we had identified and justify them in a little text box. And the third step that we couldn't really develop properly because it was COVID and everything was closed in France, but was the user's evaluation. And this, we were actually kind of sad because we wanted to experiment more experimental protocols with the users, like drawings or photography or word clouds, or just another way of making evaluation with the people that actually attend those cultural events. So I don't know if I'm late, but real quick, I'll talk to you about what came out of this and what are some of the effects that we could identify and that we could kind of measure with the questionnaires. There was the dynamization of cooperative and interdisciplinary processes, which is a key topic in hybrid arts, especially. We also could understand better the practices transformation in the artistic sector that those actors can develop. Also, the change in representations in the cultural field, and also the shape of public policy that this can involve. Of course, there's the topic of societal transformations, and for digital and hybrid arts, they are developing a critical approach to technology and to contribute to shaping collective imaginaries. And the last but not least, we talked about the environmental impacts, which we couldn't really go in depth because it's a whole other kind of evaluation which needs to go way further than this. But we wanted to make it appear a little bit because it's really important, even more in the technological field. So now I'll give the floor to Carole, who will give you the actor point of view of being part of such a study.
Thank you, Mathilde. So first of all, I deeply apologize for my poor English. I'll try to do my best, because after the level of Mathilde, I'm not so confident now, and I hope my whole my colleague will help me after to be more confident at the end. So yes, I just want to put a feedback as an actor and a member of ACNUM. So I will try to not read so much, but of course I will need to read my note. So firstly, I'm Carole Giordano, Deputy Director of Chroniques. Chroniques is a member both of LaboFriche, La Belle and a member of ACNUM network. And we follow the research with Mathilde and Raphaël. We obviously share the concern of the study, in particular the need to make visible and tangible all the kind of activities that escape for the economic metrics from the network. It was really the start of the survey and the research. But as a feedback, unfortunately, I can say as a conclusion that nothing really happened after concerning the actors. So that's an issue, and I want to discuss a bit about that. I think I have 4 reasons for this. I don't know if I... Yes. 4 reasons, but basically one can maybe summarize the things is that the difficulty for actors to work on non-economic metrics when you face or you need to find economic solution. This is the short-term, mid-term problematic between this kind of research. Of course, the results provide an interesting insight into what digital art producers generate as social impact or values. But the first things that we maybe do not work on kind of implementation tool or protocol for the actor to take this survey and try to make things inside a local context and project. And knowing that these actors have a big lack of time to conduct this kind of evaluation, the tools that could be given after this kind of survey to the actor is really important. The other way, or other thing that also Patricia mentioned during the keynote, is that why we need this kind of survey. It's basically to convince or to have other metric to convince the policymakers or decision makers about funding. And it's really hard for actors to take this kind of metrics and try to convince with the basic metrics we have, economic impact, tourism, territorial marketing, etc. So that was the first thing that nothing happened after, because it's not a tool for short-term issues that face to the actors. The other reason I see is that the self-evaluation is really interesting in terms of process for the operators and the organization inside the ACNUM. It's a way to recognize their value, to take also ownership of these kind of indicators or metrics, to integrate them into a process for understanding their own action. But firstly, this requires a critical mass of evaluation to see what could be objective and share with all the network, and what could be very useful in the discussion with the policymakers. So it was the second reason why it's not working after the survey. And these first 2 points lead us to the third, is that, in my opinion, I think this kind of survey and the work need after this kind of survey to have relation and to make advocacy on the basis of non-market effect, to legitimize the action of these social or cultural actors, must be achieved by intermediary organization. It could be a structure representing the sector, and I think ACNUM must take care of this kind of survey and go through this with, for example, the Minister of Culture in France, etc., and not waiting for the actor to take the methodology to change things. And it could be also provided by institutional structure, maybe the ministry itself, it could be possible. We see with the ADEME, for example, ADEME in France, I don't know exactly the name in English, who is working on this kind of metrics about ecological challenge. And the final point, if I can to add things about the survey and the discussion of today, yeah, it's an example that it's written inside the survey itself. It's about to just explain what is externality, positive externalities. Was take the example of the bee and its unique role in pollination. And when we see how we take care of it and the policymakers take care of this challenge of ecological aspect, etc., with this kind of metrics, it may be demonstrated that the moment we are living is not so crucial to convince, but maybe also to find, by this kind of research and survey, way to let's say, to find references or shared standard to alongside to the market cycle, to find a new way to share value between actors, non-economic or non-monetary values, and could be maybe give solution economic or the way to produce things for the actors on the basis of this kind of results of the research. I mean, the self-evaluation could be help us to see what exactly we are in capacity to produce as a social and cultural values, and maybe what we can share inside ACNUM itself, like outside the market, to find economic sustainability and possibility to produce things we want to produce at the end. So yes, it was my 4 points to just complete the presentation of Mathilde, and I thank you for your listening.
That was great. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you speaking in English. And it's a bit presumptuous of us to come over here and ask you to speak in English, but we do really, really appreciate it. Yes, Adam.
Thank you for your sharing your example. I have a question just to clarify, make sure I understand, around when you were talking about how to share value between actors as being one of the challenges that you feel would be useful to still address. How do we share value between actors? Do you mean how do we have a way of talking about value that is comparable between actors, or do you mean that we have a way of accepting a collective attribution for value, so that it's because you have many actors making a contribution, often a funder requires you to claim this contribution for your particular effort. So my question is, when you talk about when your question about how to share value, I think I agree with that that's a real challenge, but do you think it's the challenge of sharing in terms of how we can be cross-comparable, or sharing in terms of how we can have a collective attribution? And I'm sorry if that's not said in French. Maybe someone. No,
it's okay. It's fine.
Okay?
It's a challenging question, of course, but I think I will say both. But as a short-term preoccupation for operators, I think the first thing is to share reciprocity. Yes, in the contribution we can maybe. Only inside the network itself, it could be interesting, because we can share things about production, about many things, but we always have the first way to think. It's about economy, it's about money, it's about how to exchange money, about production. Maybe we can build a kind of standard or, référentiel in French, to try to share things without money exchange. So it could be a first interesting step. knowing that inside a network with operators that share many type of activities or value, it could be not so complicated, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Right, great. Thank you very much again. And we're now going to move on to our next speaker. Malik, are you ready to take the floor?
Hello, everybody. So, like my new friend Carol, I will read my notes. I apologize, but sorry. For 25 years, I've been director of community centers in a suburb of Paris, in Marseille, and in Fos-sur-Mer, little town near Marseille. So I will start with a short speech to introduce social communities, and after I will introduce the method. Community centers appeared in France approximately at the same period as settlements in England. The aim was to help and educate working class people. It is after the Second World War, during the economic boom of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and the development of cities in France, that community centers focused on the following missions: taking care of children and young people on Wednesday and holidays, to supervise them, and also allow them to participate in different activities and apprenticeship workshops, meetings with parents to talk about issues in their relationships with their children at school, communication, screen addiction, French courses for newly arrived people, helping studies for children, social integration, action for jobless people, parties and neighborhood meals. They also develop various projects, local TV and radios, shared garden, young people communities trips, holiday stays, cultural and artistic projects. There is a common approach as far as the family is concerned, but every structure is free to manage its project according to opportunities. The centers are managed by associations elected every year by a General Assembly of Residents. They work with a team of salaried employees, specialists in leading team. Generally, there is a director with a team and an administrative staff. A team has about 7 salaried employees, but some more important centers can have up to 50 permanent employees. The average budget is about 700,000 euros, but can reach 4 million for the big ones. The money comes from the French Benefits Office, municipalities, departments, city policies, foundations, and the financial help from members. Most of them are found in popular neighborhoods where living conditions are sometimes poor, but also in the middle-class areas in rural territory. Since 2017, I've been working on the concept of social utility and social impact. And in 2021, I founded a training organization in order to develop an assessment project of social center. Here are the objectives: to show precisely and methodically the effect of social center upon the members, to underline the specific features and added values of social center in the social educational field, to show the ability of teams to carry out assessments, to change the perception of social centers by institutions, to get better recognition, to influence the choice of social educational policies, and to get new funds. But before giving some example of this working method, I would like to ponder over the notions of social impact and social utility, for the two terms are close but actually very different ideologically speaking. Social impact is only about the effect produced. It doesn't deal with their origin. The term social impact is linked to a performance approach, or social caching is on. This explains the common tendency to express the social value in euros, for example, by explaining that if you give €1 for a specific social policy, you will get back to maybe €5, or you will save €5. This vision focused on performance terms for a capitalistic economy from competition, and the result is that today or tomorrow, association, non-profit organization will become competitors in project. And it is the most socially lucrative which will get the subsidy. What I mean is that to assess social value, we choose the non-profit approach, more global, more aware of organizational practices and patterns that allow its achievement. Our target is not performance, but the quality of practices, of work and processes, which is the key to social value in a field of mutual understanding. Our objective is not to be competitors, but sharers of good practices in a spirit of cooperation, as apparently we are doing now. Now, I will introduce you the method we use to assess the social value of some project. It is a bottom-up method which starts from the user and what they say. Elle est déjà passée, mais en fait, pour revenir en arrière. Wow. So, we start one day to determine the workshop leading teams. They have 1 month to implement them. The aim is to allow people to say what change the social center has brought them on a daily basis and why it is important. For each workshop, the team feel in a grid with the assessments of people. 2 extra days of training are necessary to analyze the comments and detect the following elements. There are examples of what we are doing in the workshop with the users. And this is a first study. Alors, où j'en suis? Donc, this is a result of a study carried out among retired people in social center. The study encompassed 11 social centers spread over the South region. 40 workshops were set up involving 364 people with a total of 210 evaluations. Donc, I show you example before. Ça va mieux comme ça? Okay, sorry. Sorry, I read my note. I don't look around. So this is the way we work. We analyze the testimonies, and we build topics, and after we look for the structure of social value. And this is in the chart, the following chart, the classification of the 220 evaluation involving not-profit STEM. Okay? Yes. It's not so easy for me, sorry. So for us, this is the first step in the assessment project of social value. The next step is to carry out questionnaire to quantify detected effect and give proportion, because it is hard to know if it's 10, 20, 30, or maybe 200 people who express themselves in a workshop. Here are results from 3 groups dealing with the topic of social link. This is another project. A group of women, a group of women taking part in adult activities. A group of women just arrived in France taking part in French courses. A group of children getting private lesson on Wednesday. The main effects have been spotted during the first phase of the training. New meetings, new friends with people you can see again outside the center. The social center is the main place where my social life is organized. In other words, no center, no social life. So results give proportion, but also element of understanding. Children with private lessons come from 4 different schools, for the area is very large. Some already know each other from the same school, but they meet children from other schools. However, it is not easy for them to keep those links outside the center because it's hard to travel in such a large area. public transport are few, and there is a lot of violence because of drug trafficking, and some parents are reluctant to let their children go out alone. So the difference for the children, it's difficult for them to see each other outside the social center. Part of the women taking French courses are Kurds or from the Comoros. Others come from Algeria, Morocco, or Sub-Saharan Africa. Some already knew each other, but all of them met new people, and a lot of them become friends. However, only 27% of them regard the social center as their main place of activity or social link. For the Kurdish women and all those from the Comoros spend a large part of their lives in their communities. Yet 70% of the women with adult activity declare the social center is their main place for activity and their main social link. There are women who have lived in France for a long time, but because of circumstances, arrived without knowing anybody, and as they did not have a special place to meet other people, remain isolated. But thanks to the creation of the social center in 2017, they were able to set up a network of helpful people. This is just an example of what we achieved, and many other fields are explored, such as apprenticeship, health, family harmony, social and cultural opening. Today, I just want to explain how we work to assess social value through concrete examples. Thank you.
That was really great. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from the floor?
I'll do it in English, but then I can do it in French afterwards. Just one thing is that in English you say community center, when in French we say social center. I really think we should think about this deeply. And the other thing is, did I understand right? You first spoke to people and get the testimonies, and then you built a questionnaire to get quantities. Is that it? Yes. Okay. Because I think it's interesting, because most of the time we do the contrary. We get quantities and then we get back to some people to get it.
No, for us, this is exploration workshop. It's an exploration, and because people say some things, we build questionnaires. This is the way we take.
Do we have any other questions? Well, we're going to do some questions at the end of the session anyway. But first of all, we're going to travel to the UK and pass the mic over to Sven.
Thank you. And thanks to the LaboFriche team for inviting us. It's absolutely fantastic. There's such an inspiration, the project. And the UK and London can learn a lot from it. Just to stay there. It was also great to hear the other speakers. Patricia, absolutely, the economics as a lingua franca, sort of invading a particular space that previously hasn't spoken that language is an aspect I'm quite interested in. But also, Mathilde, you were speaking about the experiential knowledge and how we can promote that. I think these are aspects I wanted to touch on. So if you can go to the next slide, what I want to... Oh, there we go. Merci. So what I wanted to do is give a practitioner's perspective, a UK practitioner's perspective, to sort of flesh out a few experiences that we had with a particular discourse, with a particular system that comes at us as practitioners. I do engage in the frameworks, I do engage in policy, but I think the approach that what I wanted to contribute today was very much the practitioner's perspective. So what I do is, my background is self-initiated projects. I will show you one later, which is essentially starting a project and actually carrying it out. I'm also a consultant for the built environment, and my clients are local authorities, developers and funds, and with the question, how can we create a particular spatial situation? I'm also teaching at St. Martin's in the architecture department, But my real focus is linguistics and culture history. That's my background. So when I look at the world and I look at that discourse, those are my goggles. What I'm not doing here is a particular academic discussion or policy or finance. We have to eclipse that for a second, because those are huge things. Now, what is really interesting as a practitioner, what happened, and that's my personal experience, I think I share this with lots of people, were two moments that happened in our professional life. One happened in 2013, and that was that in the UK, the UK Public Services Social Value Act was published and came into effect in 2013. That sort of slowly filtered through, and what happened quite recently in the past 24 months, let's say, that when you apply for a public project, you often have to demonstrate the social value. And that has changed how you apply for projects, that has changed how you tender for projects. There's no judgment in whether it's better or worse, it's just something that has changed for a practitioner. The second thing was that it sort of rippled through the industry, and that's the finance industry, is that the CEO of BlackRock made a big announcement saying that all of the BlackRock investments, one of the biggest investment funds, will look at purpose, ESG, and other elements to make decisions on investment. Whether you buy into that or not, what has happened, it is rippled through as a discourse for the industry, and suddenly everybody talked about it, and people do ask for that. So what has happened in terms of tenders and briefs in the private sector, you have to suddenly demonstrate that you generate social value, you adhere to a particular system of ESG, and that you monitor it. So that has happened, and rapidly so in the past 2 years. So what has happened there was suddenly that it was shaking things up. And when you look at it from a sort of linguistic perspective, there was suddenly two different languages. There was a whole new on side A. I mean, I'm going back to a very old sort of linguistics model that's about 100 years old, but it's really quite the simple way of looking at what kind of image you have and what you say. And when you look at side A, it was sort of that sort of new arrival of a language of social value is metrics that you can use as building blocks, and they have an objective, often financial value. And then there was sort of practitioners community that has been doing projects like LaboFriche, projects I've been doing, and there was something that was sort of professional experience mixed with knowledge of a place and other elements. And that was sort of suddenly we didn't quite understand each other, and often it was a misunderstanding when it came to project planning and so forth. So essentially what I saw was three different dilemmas. It was like there was a practitioner, and there's sort of a tradition of doing things the way you do it, and was sort of inherent knowledge versus metrics. And again, there's no judgment whatsoever. I mean, there was a lot of sort of thinking about where's that incidental project? Can we not just go to a place and do something out of the situation versus something that is driven by framework, where you sort of think about what you want to achieve first, and then you basically apply certain metrics to then action a project. And the last one is the situational versus, going ahead. How do we go back? The little one. There you go. That's okay. So essentially what I wanted to demonstrate here was you essentially had that sort of quite rectangular definition of value that often has an equivalent in the industry of a financial value. Often that's very clearly defined. And then you have this bleed. And we're currently really struggling to get a grip on what you see of this sort of yellow and blue cloud. And those words I put into this cloud is just examples. Like responding to biographies, individual biographies, as opposed to an age group. Situational opportunities, often they are not recognized in a sort of metric approach because it's different to Brooklyn, it's different to Marseille, it's different to Berlin. And then sort of unlocking place-specific potential. I mean, we've all been there, we've all seen it probably. So that's sort of these languages that are sort of clashing at the moment. That's how I see it. And what then happened is that lots of sort of conflicting languages were being presented. So there's lots of universities developing social value models, lots of funds developing social value models, and they're not always matching. They have lots of overlaps, but we're not arrived at a point where we're all speaking the same language. So what I wanted to show how this played out in practice from my personal experience with 3 examples. The first project self-initiated was Bold Tendencies. We started that in 2008. It's probably not too far away from LaBouche, in the sense that it was an underused car park in South London. It was locked away, the top 2 floors, and slowly through an art cultural project, an annual commissioning project for culture, dance, and other art forms, we were given access to the space. There was no funding attached to it. It was literally just self-administrated. And then it slowly grew. Some things didn't work out. We had a lot of problems with outreach. You know, we had audience sort of clusters and effects that weren't planned. And then it sort of slowly grew and still working. So it's still an annual project. It's still opening in May, still closing in September. I'm not running it any longer, but what I would be calling this is sort of structured naivety. Nobody with a sort of structured plan would have started it unless you just want to create the activity and find a home for it. So I think lots of parallels. I mean, I hope it's correct with LaBouche, in that sense that it started and then it sort of slowly figured itself out. It slowly organized itself. It slowly solidified and sort of became social value ultimately. And then what you can see here is sort of then filtered through the whole car park, and then studios were added to that. The local authority who owns the building then also engaged more thoroughly, and there was public funds were contributed, and sort of that story really rippled through the building, and now it sort of has a longer lifespan, is on a longer lease, and has a similar effect to LaBouche, to its environment, I hope. The second project, completely different, recently happened, Soho, big American investment fund. The brief was, we want to have the best performing ESG building in all of London. Not the only brief I've seen like that. And we were given a particular social value system, which is the ESG is environmental, social, and governmental metrics that you perform against and that can be evaluated. Often it's also then monitored against financial performance. So lots of investment funds have particular targets and then advertise that their fund is performing particularly well. So it could be with regards to carbon, it could be with regards to social value and so forth. So essentially we then had a whole list. This is a tiny sort of list. This is also general knowledge. This is in the public domain with particular elements where we then had to create a ground floor experience according to the outputs. And as you can see, the back column was a clear equivalent in pound signs. We had already had an animation concept for the ground floor, and then we had to completely change it, which in the end we would have to see how it plays out in practice. But essentially, the animation concept that we had in mind, we wanted to work with a sort of homeless charity next door, was not possible because it did not score well enough when it came to the metrics. Again, this is not to say this is a worse system, but this is happening in practice at the moment. If you go to the next slide. No, I'm doing it still, sorry. So a different project where we were sort of almost in response to it, we're trying a slightly different approach. This is Shepherd's Bush Market, it's in West London. It's an old 100-year-old market, which is along a train line. What we were trying to do here was an approach where we had a constant social value monitoring with a baseline, with a sort of quite place-based activation approach, where we did not, or where we are not looking at the specific output for each individual activation, like sort of, we had Notting Hill Carnival intervention. So we would do that activation, and then evaluate afterwards. And then it was sort of a hybrid approach, essentially. So far, that's the best thing we came up with. It's not perfect, but that's basically where we arrived at. So then going back to a more sort of positive solution-based approach, if you have these three dilemmas, as I see them, practitioner versus metrics, incidental versus framework, and situational versus sort of a universal value, how we counter this or how we react to this is three things. With regards to those metrics, we try to engage in place analysis that gives something very close to metrics. One of them is mapping, because this geospatial approach allows a very kind of metric approach and observing. The second one, especially with regards to frameworks, is sort of engaging policy, and the last one is to engage clients on site. It sounds very simple, but it is actually amazingly effective from my experience. So if you look at the first one, so we're very, very lucky in London that the GLA pushed for a culture infrastructure framework and is continually measuring this and actually upgrading as we speak, which is a baseline. So culture infrastructure was defined and is and mapped, and it helps to create a sort of fairly objective argument when it comes to developing specific sites, because we're speaking about the same values. I mean, the system is not perfect, and we're continuously upgrading it. But when we look at a particular place, as you can see in the green, the sort of green delineation, we looked at a particular place. We could identify a particular concentration of cultural infrastructure and then react in response to it with a fairly objective metric response. But it didn't preclude, we didn't weight it at that point, and the weighting was done within the framework of the cultural infrastructure. The second one was engaging policy, so I suppose this is what we're doing today, in actually engaging what that social value definition could be and comparing notes between also internationally. So I think this is a really important thing we're doing tonight. And the last one was bringing clients on site. Now, one of these things that worked really well, we brought UK clients to La Cité Fertile in Pantin, and it was eye-opening to see people, a CEO of a big investment fund, CEO of a development company, go into a project and see. We went to the École de Tiers-Lieux and went to different other organizations, and it immediately sparked. The next Monday we had emails in the inbox where they asked, how can we achieve this? So those were just three quick insights into a practitioner's perspective. Thank you very much.
And I really enjoyed the maps especially. I love maps. Do we have any questions from the floor?
I have a question. Are you happy to have me?
Yes, of course. I didn't realize who that was there for a second, but yes, Patricia.
It's Patricia, and yeah, I'm here, and like what I'm hearing is fascinating. Thanks so much to the other presenters, and yeah, I do in fact have a question for you, because I think we all agree to an extent that what we value is inherently situational, it's context-specific, it's to do with developing networks of actors that are kind of difficult to replicate. So what we value is effectively sticky, right? Kind of difficult to extrapolate and put in a format that then can be compared, benchmarked. But the problem is that like policymakers think that this is kind of essential for them to be able to process information. They need benchmarking, and then they need to manipulate that information very quickly. So like, what do you do with all this specificity? As it happened, this is like what we kind of value, right? So my question to you is, there are three options for us. Either like we veto the policy-making approaches and just insist that policymakers see that they in fact make subjective judgments premised on politics, not based on evidence, and we kind of just refuse to play the game. So that's option number one. Option number two, we compromise and cave in and kind of think of indicators as the distorting but maybe necessary approximation of something. Or thirdly, do you think that alternative approaches can be developed from within the sector? Meaning, can we give policymakers what they insist they want, which is the ability to compare across context while staying true to ourselves? Sorry, long question, but I'm genuinely curious what you will say, guys.
Well, it's always difficult. From my point of view, it sits somewhere between 2 and 3. I think the danger with just coming up with our own system is that it may not get any traction, because A, there's other systems that have already a lot of traction, and B, it is, it's like it's not actually the language that comes out of the sector. So I think how I would look at it is, it's basically, it is an economic language. It is a metric language that we have to learn how to speak without necessarily having to accept every single term, not every single word. And I think we can challenge notions. I think we can challenge the grammar. But I think we should try to speak the same language.
I wanted to respond to Patricia's question by wondering whether there's such a thing or could be such a thing as collective subjectivity. So if we elect somebody through a democratic process to represent our interests, yes, that individual may have a subjective position, but do we have trust in that individual, in that party, or in that collective that we've elected to represent us? And if we do have trust, then can we trust their subjectivity? So, yeah, because otherwise, who else then? Some other random person decides? Or how, we have a democratic system that may or may not be working as well as it could. But within that, of course, we're all human beings, including our policymakers. And so is it a sin to have subjectivity? Or can we work towards collective subjectivity?
You want to answer? No? Yeah, please come. I just have this little introduction. I forgot to present her, Julia David, who is writing here, registering by graphic recording. So that's what you are seeing on the screen. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just thinking about Sven's maps that spatialize the gaps and what's being measured in terms of value, sometimes directly financial exchange. And I wondered, to Adam's question, whether there might also be not just collective subjectivity, but collectively spatial subjectivity, and more than one pair of eyes thinking about how this gets mapped. It creates another data set. It still creates a kind of value that would be crunched and delivered to policymakers in a particular way, but it could be quite an interesting one, and not an uncomplicated one in terms of the histories of mapping and measure as well.
I think you've all talked either explicitly or implicitly about cultural value and social value. Social value seems to have the metric that's active. And actually, this is what Patricia was referring to as well. Is it something that's feasible to... not so much measure cultural value, but measure the path from, I suppose, cultural production to social value, or is that just absolutely so slippery, or is it possible? Is there a sort of socio-cultural aspect which is joined up, I guess?
Is it particles? I suppose it's the same. I don't know. For me personally, it's like a particle or wave. It is both, right? And I think as a practitioners community, we got away with murder for a long time, doing stuff, and nobody held us accountable for certain things. So do we have to be self-critical and ask, have we actually spent the money that we've been given through grants and contributions, and so have we spent it in the right place? Have we been inclusive enough? I don't know. I've done stuff and I wasn't good enough personally. So maybe metrics help me to actually get on my toes and stretch a bit further and get going. But I also equally, sometimes I'm just, if I see a tender and I need to explain the social value in pound coins, I'm not going for the tender equally, because I'm not interested in any practitioners. Again, there's no judgment, but it also deters action that could happen if you just going for the metric. So I think it's that hybrid thing, right? We are responsible, but also we want to create, have that situational freedom and actually being able to unlock something out of a situation, I think.
Someone want to complete? No? Yeah? A last intervention, maybe? I don't know. Okay.
In response to Mick's point, and also clarify my understanding of what Patricia was saying, is it that culture is a collective action that delivers social impacts? So are we actually trying to, this idea of social impacts, cultural impacts, is culture an impact or is culture an action that delivers social impacts? And for me, listening to what's being said and hearing what's been said, I felt like there was, it's like something not computing. Why is it so difficult to get our heads around that, given that all of these people are looking at it? And if culture is collective and social is individual, and Patricia notes that the sum of individual impacts does not equal or does not recognise all of the value in the collective cultural impact, then I wonder whether culture is an action rather than an impact.
Let me very quickly respond to that. May I just, because totally, the issue is that if you cannot map from from cultural value to social value, I'm just quitting. We have to be able to do that. We have to be able to demonstrate. But here's the thing. We don't need to insist on measuring cultural value, because indeed it is the irreducibly collective thing that configures other things that can be measured. Here I'm wondering, and I'm not an expert on social value, over to you, but maybe social value is the kind of thing that we can, translate in terms of proxies well enough that it will make cultural value manifest. So, I basically agree.
I think we need, I'm sorry, we'll continue the debate, but I think we have to move for the second session. Ellie, you want to take the mic?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our speakers. That was a very good session. I enjoyed it. And now we'll be hopefully having some more questions and discussions at the end. So now you can sit back and relax, think a bit about power, and then join the discussion again.